Welcome to the Valor Fire Training Podcast. We're glad you're here because this podcast is designed for you, the fire service community, to learn about tactics, training, and culture. In each episode, we'll sit down with influential firefighters to discuss hot topics and current events. Before we dive in, remember that you can find entertaining video versions of each episode along with more on our YouTube channel. Just search Valor Fire Training, subscribe, and hit the notification button to be alerted when new content is added. And now, here's your host, Dave Mellon. What is up, everybody? This is Dave with Valor Fire Training again. I am joined by Ben Martin. How is it going, dude?
Dave, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited about this. It's been a long time coming. I'm just ready to jump in.
Yeah. And so as it always goes with most of these podcasts, we spend about 15-20 minutes talking before off camera and just kind of breaking the ice, getting it kind of comfortable. You know, sometimes we get on a podcast, you're not really sure what the format's going to be and things like that. But there were so many nuggets that you were throwing out. And it's so hard because I want to be like, no, save that, or say that exact same thing when we're recording. So it's already started off to be an awesome podcast. So I want to thank you for taking time. Why don't you tell everybody who you are, where you're from, what you do, and kind of your passion?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Benjamin Martin. I've been with the fire service for about 20 years now. I started as a volunteer in the state of Virginia. And then after a few years of doing that, realized that I could actually make a living, support a family with it. Got into it, and I'm probably like most people on this podcast. I just absolutely fell in love with it. I just couldn't see myself doing anything. So that has been the blessing in my life. It's also been probably the largest curse of my life too. I think I love this job just a little bit too much. So over the last 7 or 8 years, I've really shifted away from trying to do everything in this fire service and kind of looked inward about who do I leave this to, and how do I build relationships in which people would want to talk to me so that I could leave it to them. And that has been as rewarding as learning how to put out fires in firehouses. And so I joke that I'm the worst student you would want in your class. You've got about 3 minutes to keep my attention before my ADD kicks in, and I'm going to open up my computer and my phone and go nuts. So having had that experience, and I decided that, I thought I had some experiences I might want to share, a lot of failures, because I wasn't hearing about that a lot. And I started doing that about 6 years ago, and it kind of took hold. And you got to have a platform to get into these conferences. And so, ironically enough, I actually kind of fell into the embrace resistance idea from being a lieutenant of training with my department. We were doing nozzles and streams, and I was teaching these kids that had never done this before about all the techniques we teach to absorb the nozzle reaction, that Newton's third law stuff. And one of the kids basically said, well, if I don't open the nozzle, then there's no reaction. And he's joking. And he's like, that's how you survive. And I was like, yeah, but what about the people on the other end that the stream was designed for?
Right.
And which, by the way, includes you, So yeah, you can keep that nozzle shut, but why would you? I can teach you how to flow and go. I can teach you how to absorb that. It's not a big deal. So with a little bit of humility on your part and a little bit of willingness to share a mind, like, we can learn this. And I thought about that, and I was like, man, ain't that the truth? Like, we would not tolerate anybody on the line that refused to open the nozzle for fear of getting knocked over from that reaction. But that's leadership. Like, we make a decision, and there's a counter reaction to that decision. Every action, reaction. And so leaders don't like that reaction a lot of times, and so they don't open the nozzle. They don't make any more decisions. And we probably can put names, to those stories, and it's frustrating. I call them RIP leaders. They're not cut like Jack. They're like retired in place leaders. But they don't go anywhere. They're not giving up their ranks. So I really wanted to try to break that up, because I honestly believe through my own journey and learning some of the mistakes I was making that there were ways to have conversations that would come across as less threatening. There were ways that you could build relationships where you could hold people to a very high standard, and they wouldn't be mad at you about that. They'd rally to that. They'd feel inspired by that. I didn't have all those tools, and spending the last 6 or 7 years, whether it's on the job or teaching and learning from the students or working in a school setting, just trying to figure out what that looks like and finding a better version of my leadership. So when we talk about embracing the resistance, what we're talking about is the back pressure we get from people's decisions, because we didn't have the nozzle for the fire stream. We wouldn't have the back pressure, but we'd also have water at our feet, and it would be dangerous. Like, it would hurt people around us. And so the badge for me is kind of like the nozzle. Like when you get that chance to lead from a formal position, like make decisions, expect reactions, learn techniques, like be better, but don't ever stop leading. Don't ever stop thinking that it's yours to take care of these people, make decisions. And I'm sure we'll get into like what I actually think that means and looks like at some point, but that's kind of the skinny. So I get the chance to teach at FDIC and travel all over the country and learn from you guys and share some nuggets and meet people like Dave, and it's just been incredibly humbling and just really awesome to meet people and be inspired by their stories.
Yeah. Well, and it's so cool because, when you and I first met, we talked and usually within the first 10 minutes of me talking to somebody else in the fire service, one of the educational peers, I'll sit there and don't get me wrong. I mean, it's not like a well-kept secret. Like we're sizing each other up, right? Like the first time we met, you're like, is this guy a D-bag or is he like a really good
Yeah.
dude? Does he really believe in what he preaches or is he just out there trying to make a buck? And so for you and I, like, I think that I saw it in your eyes and I think you probably saw it in mine where as we were talking, that moment that we realized like, okay, you are what you say you are. You believe in what you believe or what you say. And it was so cool because a lot of the things that you've been teaching that I've been watching you present and listening to you put out there, I'm like, dude, this guy is like straight up. I mean, you're extremely intelligent, first off. Um, and so that's a little bit intimidating. But at the end of the day, you're so humble and you're like, listen, I've made these mistakes. I've done this. This is where I've gone wrong. And so it was really cool because you get that ability to, through your programs, learn the mistakes that you've made and other people have made. And so it's relatable. And so, like, one of the things that we had talked about, I think it was like the third or fourth time that you and I talked, uh, very early on in my fire service career, I had a captain who told me the worst decision you can make is indecision.
Yeah.
And at the time he was talking about tactical, right? Like if you pull up on a scene and you're given a size up and you don't know what to do, the worst thing you can do is just sit there and vapor lock, right? But then as I moved on through my career and I started doing more administrative stuff, I realized that there are things that would come up and I would sit there and think, God, how am I going to handle this? And it would take me a week or two to figure out like, okay, this is the process that I need to do to fix this problem. Well, by then it spiraled out of control because people see that nothing's getting done about it. And so by doing indecision, it made things 10 times worse. And now I'm trying to recover from that. And so, like I said, there's a lot of things that feed into that. And I can't wait to dive into it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the kind words. I can honestly say that I've had an assignment as the leader where I messed it up enough that like I lost the benefit of the doubt, I lost the trust, I lost, um, I lost their hearts and minds, and none of it was tactically. None of it was they wouldn't follow me into a building. That wasn't the part. It was they didn't want to return to the firehouse with me. They didn't like the way they felt about themselves because my standard was too high, and I didn't have the right empathy or the right perspective. So once you have walked into a room where basically the oxygen's sucked out by just your presence and people don't want to talk to you, you genuinely learn to appreciate, like even if you're not necessarily enjoying the conversation with the person you're talking to, like I love the fact that they're willing to talk to me, and there's a rep in there to get better in my version of leadership even if I'm not enjoying the conversation, and there's perspective to be shared, from them. And just because they think it and just because I think they're wrong doesn't mean necessarily they are. There's a lot of stuff that I'm reading that talks about how we really negotiate what things mean. Like it's not necessarily so black and white. And if you've ever had a conversation with someone where you're like, you get it, and he's like, yeah, I got it, and then he shows up to work the next day and he's doing something completely different, and you're like, I thought we left on this page, and he's like, no, I did, and you're like, but you're not doing what we agreed upon. And he's like, no, this is exactly what we agreed upon. I talked with such and such after we talked, and he suggested I do this, and he thought that would meet the spirit of what we talked about. And you're like, it didn't. That's not
Right.
like the appearance of communication is what is haunting the fire service. Not that it's not happening; it's the fact that we think it happened. Email, text, words, meaning, like, and all that stuff. And so that's the Rubik's cube that's most interesting to me right now. Is like, how is it that I can say something that registers with Dave, but how can I also make sure that no matter how passionate I am about something, I get to hear what he has to say because he's not wrong in his world, and he's the one that's closest to the problem. So he might be asking me, I might have a perfectly reasonable solution to his problem, but he's still the one at the seat of the bail with a nozzle, putting the water on his problem. So it's his to do. And if he chooses to do an O pattern, with his tactics on how to solve that problem instead of what I told him to do, then it's okay if his problem gets solved. And then he gets the rep, he gets that feeling of competency. And that makes you way more likely to do, your own problem solving in the future than if I bail you out every time. So I think at the core of leadership, you have to have a humility. And whether you delay just enough to let somebody say what's on their mind and it's safe enough for them to do it, and you can support it or challenge it or mold it, like that's one tool. Or whether you straight up tell them based on them being new and not having any bearings what needs doing, that's cool too. I find the more I shrug my shoulders and go, I don't know, what do you think? The better the outcomes are. Which doesn't mean I'm not influencing them. It's just I want you to have as much ownership of whatever it is that you're going to do after this as possible. And for that to happen, you have to weigh in. It cannot be me telling you what to do 100%. I just don't think it's going to work out for anybody to do it that way, especially when you're working with tenured members who have life and career experience that they can borrow from to get their bearings.
Yeah. Well, and that's, you brought it up, and it's a really great segue into kind of what the first question is, or the first thing that I want to talk about. So, when we talk about crew dynamics and leadership, your crew can make or break you. And so when you said, my crew didn't want to come back with me, I've been an overbearing leader. When I first got my taste of being a company officer, when I first rode the seat, I was extremely autocratic. I mean, there was not probably one bit of me that was laissez-faire. It wasn't a discussion. This isn't a democracy. I'm the officer. I'll tell you what to do, and you'll do it. And it lasted about 3 shifts. And then they were like, all right, bro, this isn't going to work. Right.
Yeah.
And so, we have our adjustments and stuff like that. But now what I've found is that some of your biggest cheerleaders and some of your biggest critics are going to be your crew. So as a leadership person, as somebody who kind of focuses on leadership, what do you think the biggest issues are that people don't fully understand about gaining the buy-in and gaining the trust of your crew? Where do you think people go wrong with that?
So one of the things that I've been jumping all over is that trust in and of itself is not the goal with your teams, which sounds crazy and your head's probably exploding and you're like, oh, I'm going to turn this podcast off. But if you think about things we probably could agree on when it comes to trust, I feel like we could probably say trust is hard to build and easy to lose. And if we can agree on that, then the reason we agree on that is because human beings, we are prone to being safer than sorry. Like if we screwed that up all those years ago while we were evolving, then the thing in the bushes that was rumbling that we were a little too curious and hung around a little bit too long to see what it was ate us, and the DNA didn't pass along. But the ones that were a little bit more proactive and boot scooting are the ones who lived and their DNA got passed down. So we are naturally at arm's length with most people. And what's ironic is even if we know them and we have a good relationship with them, you put that person in a different role to you, like your peers, and then they get promoted and now they're your boss. Like there's going to be a period of time where you're going to have them at arm's length until they've proven themselves. And so what does proving yourself look like? What does that actual trust look like? I think it's a matter of frequency and competency. It's like, maybe 4 quadrants. So if you have a leader who has, no competency and he rarely ever makes a decision, if none, then you're certainly not going to trust him. If he has a high degree of competency, but he still rarely ever makes a decision, then he's kind of up here on the competency, but still down here on the frequency. And can you trust someone fully who, like, when he or she is right, they're right, but they rarely ever weigh in and they're not much help? And the answer, I think, is no. And then you can have people that are frequently like interacting, but their competency is so low that they're wrong. And now what's interesting about this is this gives you, I think, probably one of the things of trust that we don't think about is I can give you something, and if you screw it up enough, I will learn to trust that you will screw it up. And I will then take, like, based on that trust, because it's really just a reflection of certainty. How certain am I that you'll have an outcome? And I won't give you that thing. And so now that trust is working against you. And whether you want to call it, how hard it is to change a first impression, I think that's a form of trust. So really what we're trying to do is how do you build a certainty by having enough competency and doing it enough? And I'll tell you that the key, I think, for the frequency piece is don't don't watch these movies and think that you have to have these grand gestures, um, or these Mel Gibson moments like in Braveheart where he's sitting on top of a horse and he's yelling to 10,000 people in the field and somehow they can all hear his motivational speech, and think that that's the moment that builds this trust that can't be shaken to its core, because it can. Like even the utmost trust can be shaken if it's a severe enough violation. Like the little things, because I said I would. Like that was the kind of the theme 4 years ago for me. Like, why are you doing this? Because I said I would. This is my follow through. I committed to this to you. And you'd be amazed at how many people offer to do things and then don't follow through for people, or start something that moves somebody towards a goal and then they abandon them because they get distracted or they start thinking about their own thing. And those things, those little wins every day, cumulatively stack up and form the foundation of what I think gets you to the what you would consider a positive trust, where it's high competency, high frequency. But what I'm going to call it is a benefit of the doubt, because you're not going to be able to have 100% competency. You're going to be wrong, and you're going to be wrong a lot, like a whole lot. When I stopped playing rugby, I was still trying to stay in the sport, so I took a referee course, and this was when the rugby was coming back to the Olympics. So, like in my mind, here's the overachiever, right? Like I haven't even refereed my first game, and I'm like, man, in 3 years, maybe I could go to like Rio and referee over there. And one of the things that really caught my ear and kind of changed the way I thought about stuff was a rugby game, it's 90 minutes of elite level play. And they said that within that 90 minutes that a leader was going to make, or the referee was going to make somewhere between 300 and 400 decisions in 90 minutes. And like critical decisions that would influence the outcome of the game. And to be considered the best of the best when they scored you, when they played the tape back and reviewed the decisions you made and whether they were right as a referee, you could miss 10%. And to think that you could be wrong 40 times critically and affect the outcome in a negative way and still be the best of the best, that gives me a little bit of hope. I think it's realistic for leadership. So knowing that you can't get everything right and you're going to get it wrong, whether it's you read the context wrong or you didn't have the context or you got emotional or you didn't have a lot of sleep or you got stuff going on at home, like you're not perfect. And when you make that mistake, you want to have kind of a safety net, which I think is that benefit of the doubt, and that you can hit, bounce back up, and they'll go, oh, Ben got that one wrong, whether it was a call or career advice or coaching conversation or whatever it was, and say, but we're still willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think what frames the benefit of the doubt is your heart. And I think that comes from willingness to be humble, humility. And I think you see that in your mentoring aspects, where think about the people that you would consider a mentor. Did they share a story of success with you? Or was the endearing moment when you were kind of in the grinder and they shared a similar story? And whether you learned something from it or not, it was just like, man, you're just like me and you've been there and I get that. And like their willingness to be vulnerable and have humility and show you what's behind the curtain, even of their success, is I think what endears us a lot. I think that's probably more the bind of human connection is our mistakes more than our successes, because we're just so imperfect. That's the thing I think that will, when you let your hair down and let people see who you are and what your motivations are, and you're consistent in what you do and you do it frequently and you're for your people when you show up, that gives you the benefit of the doubt. And when you have the benefit of the doubt, people will follow you, like Colin Powell says, with if nothing more than just out of curiosity to see where you're going. And you can win with that. Like once people surrender their need to monitor their world for safety, like is this leader out for himself? Is this leader going to stab me in the back? Can I trust her or him? Like once people will let that down, or if you want to call it their guard down, relationships get built. Like the mission can get done. You can leverage that organically and authentically to help the organization, help those people. I can tell you, Dave, when you've done something gravely wrong, and you'll say thank you, because I have no other agenda than to help you. And it doesn't mean that once you get the benefit of the doubt, you still can't lose it, because you absolutely can. Dave and I were talking about that off camera before, about how you can be someone to somebody, and then you can make a decision that's so severe, especially if it then, when you give them chances to walk it back, they go, double in. You can lose that. So treating that as the precious commodity, not the fact that you've got the badge, and knowing that you can lose that, really, I think will frame you when you can look at leadership as a privilege. And once you've got that viewpoint, that's going to unlock some really cool doors for you. But if you think you're entitled to something or you think you're owed something, I think you're going to have a rough trip in any leadership position, no matter what rank it is.
Yeah, dude. So, okay, I have to say this, right? First off, that was amazing. Second, I'm going to call you every night when I can't fall asleep, and I want you to just talk to me. Like, just tell
Why?
me.
Because you just fell asleep there? Is that what you
No,
got?
'cause I want you to tell me. No, 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 no. I want you to tell me a story because that. I mean, seriously, like as you're talking, I'm like, oh my god, you're like completely changing my view. Like you made the joke earlier. You're like, well, I'm probably going to turn
Yeah.
off the podcast. No, dude, that was. Listen, you got to be open minded, right? And I think you and I are very open minded people. A lot of the people that listen to these podcasts are very open minded. But just the fact that you, in the last few minutes, have sat there and told me that what I believed was the most important thing, which is trust. It's not necessarily trust, it's another form of that relationship. And so it makes sense because I think people use trust and believing in someone as as a synonymous thing, and it's not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I can have trust in somebody, but I don't believe in what they're doing. I don't believe in their mission, or I don't believe in their rationale or their ethics. And so, yeah, I mean, and I'll use this as an example. When I started up my part-time department, I came in and it was a very, very fluid situation. They were transitioning from all volunteer to part-time. They have full-time staff. And so it was very, we'll just say that it was very fluid. But I got put in this weird spot where like I showed up, I was newer. So I, threw my stuff in the back of the rig, and the guys that were there had run calls with me. They knew who I was, and we had talked and stuff. And so one of the guys goes, "Hey, why is your stuff in the back of the truck?" And I said, "Because I'm here for my first couple shifts." And he goes, "No, dude, like you're the most senior person. You know the most. You need to ride the seat." And I was like, "Hey, man, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, I've been down this road before and I
Yeah.
know how this goes." And
Yeah.
so I was very, very, very reluctant to do it. And one of the guys pulled me aside. He was the driver for the day. And he goes, "Listen, dude, there's no egos here." Okay. He said, "There are guys with egos, but they don't come around very often." He said, "Everybody that's here wants to learn." He said, "If you sit up there, you do your job, and you take care of the crew, they'll love you forever." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's, sure, whatever." And so there are still times that I come in and, one of the people that maybe needs a little bit more time in the seat, I'll ride backwards or I'll drive and I'll let them ride the seat so that they get that experience. But by and large, this is the first time that I've been somewhere where I actually felt like there was no agenda. There was no somebody throwing me under the bus or
Yeah.
leading me down a path to say, "Yeah, Dave, we do that around here. We do it like that," and then come to find out that it's the exact opposite of the MO of the department. And so, yeah, it's very true what you said. Where once you break those barriers, it's so much easier to build those relationships. And I love the people that I work with. They seem to love me, and so that's not necessarily a new thing for me, but it's comforting. It's nice to know that I can have that type of relationship at that organization and not feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing that I would add is if you're not buying into what I said in the first part and you're still thinking that trust is the end all be all, then please know this, that if you're not winning and you're having a hard time with the dynamics of your team and they don't trust you, you don't feel like they trust you, then the solution to that is to give trust, which is counter, right? That goes against the safer versus sorry. Like usually, if Dave's my senior man and he's arguing with me, and I just feel challenged, like I start excluding Dave. I stop giving him as much information. I stop giving him as much respect in front of the guys. I stop complimenting him. Like I try to marginalize him, and that's my reaction because I'm hurting from his lack of buy-in. And maybe Dave meant to do that. Maybe he did. He has no awareness he's doing it, and maybe he didn't mean to do it at all. Um, but I have found in those moments, instead of like choking what's going on in your team to try to get control of it, it's like the what is it? The sand that the tighter you grasp, the more that falls out. You have to do the opposite. And to give you an example of what that looks like, I talked in an organization one time where they had a deputy chief who was just amazing to watch. And he could give people like devastating news and held them as accountable as I've ever seen anyone. and they loved him for it. And one of the things that I think worked for him was morale was poor in the organization. There was not a lot of buy-in. There was not a lot of benefit of the doubt. There was not a lot of trust. And when he would have his meetings with kind of the command team, the battalion chiefs and the captains below him, he would have moments where he's like, guys, I'm going to share some stuff with you that you can absolutely share. I want you to distribute to your folks. And then there's some stuff that I will say, hey, please just, for your edification only, don't share. We're still trying to figure out what the version of the rollout looks like. And I'm looking for some buy-in, but I need to be able to trust that you're not going to throw me under the bus with it. And then he would say it. And so that's an example of where he doesn't feel like he has their trust yet, but he's got to go out on a limb and give them information that would start demonstrating the frequency that would lead them to say, all right, he's acting in our best interest, even if we ultimately disagree with what the final rollout is. And it's not as simple as that. I mean, it's way more complex. I mean, you've got people's bias, you've got people's agendas, you've got their emotional states, you've got their lives. I mean, there's so much that goes on that makes every conversation really happening, even though it's the same words, everyone is kind of on a different page at some point. And that's the pace of the fire department right now that's really hurting us, is we don't have time to slow down as much as we should be to really watch for those reactions so that we can plan what comes next. We just kind of assume people got it or they're on board, and they're not. And a lot of leadership books will talk about, give your chance to people to weigh in on the front, and then let them disagree with you in private, and then they'll buy in public. And it's like, no, they won't. Not all the time. Not like, sometimes hard feelings are hard feelings, and they do not go away, and they will sink the crap out of what you're trying to do, even though it hurts them, and they know it hurts them. Like, we are very irrational people. So if things are not going well and you genuinely want to fix it, and you have to be authentic about this too, because our bullshit meters are pretty damn good. Like, our intuition about whether we're being played. And you kind of talked about this at the beginning, where I always joke, like, never meet your idols, because you're going to be disappointed. And so that's the part where it's like, do not put anything I say on a pedestal. Just kind of play with it like a Rubik's Cube. And if it helps your problem some, that's great. And if it doesn't, set it down, because it's just there. It's like the take a penny, leave a penny. I'm not upset if you take a penny. I'm not upset if you leave a penny. And I'm not upset if you don't use that. It's just there for you. But when we get to meet each other, it's always really cool to see what the motivation and are they like they present themselves. Like Jason Patton's example with Firehouse Coffee, exactly like he is in private as he is in public. Just a genuinely awesome, funny, outgoing human being. And that's really cool to see, because unfortunately my experience in a lot of times has been not great. Like, I've got a guy on a pedestal, and then I call him and privately we have a conversation, and I was like, God, like that, my phone's like dripping with his ego. And it's like, I don't like how that makes me feel when I talk to him. I don't agree with that stuff. So, then it's like, okay, I'll just kind of move on to the next one. So it's always neat when we can connect with stuff. But anyway, to tie it all back together, like, you know, things are going the way they are because of you. And if you're thinking, well, the team won't give me the opportunity, then you're admitting you have no influence. And if you don't have any influence, then are you leading? And if you're not leading, then why do they need you? So now you have to fix that. So then that becomes the give the trust part. Like, I've got information that they don't have, and I got to give it. Now, they can screw me with it. And I'm not saying you share private personnel matters and get you sued. I'm just saying that there's stuff that you might have to wrestle with their reactions, but they need to get that rep. They need to have a chance to feel how they feel about it and let you hear about it. And then maybe you have a chance to change it, or maybe don't. And the more of those moments you can provide, the more people will feel like they are being involved. And that always feels good. Like, we want to know that when we're flowing water, the fire is getting smaller or going out. And at some point, if you just sat there, even if you saw the water, like you could see it going on the fire, after 10 minutes, the fire is still as big or bigger, you're just going to shut it down because it's not working. And that's most people's efforts. Like, most people will start off wanting to give you the benefit of the doubt. So just don't screw it up. But then the same's got to be true for them, right? You got to give them the benefit of the doubt. And the first time they screw you, or mess something up, you can't go all, hammer in search of a nail on them. Like, you've got to give them a chance to get back to, because you want the grace of that benefit of the doubt to work both ways. And expecting it from them when you won't give it to them is a common leadership mistake I see a lot of times too.
Yeah. No, I love it. And so again, there's so many segues that there's usually at this point it's like we have 3 or 4 rabbit holes that we can go down. But you talked about this, and I think it's really important, and I want the listeners to be able to hear this as well. Uh, People have the ability to change, and who you were when you first got into the fire service, who you were when you got promoted to driver, lieutenant, captain, battalion chief, whatever. They're all different people. And you said off camera earlier that the firefighter Martin would hate Captain Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, and in full disclosure, I was talking about the fact that somebody approached me after I was having a conversation with one of the newer firefighters, and they're like, "Dude, who was that guy? That's
Yeah.
not Dave Mellon. That's not the guy we know." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm trying to turn over a new leaf, so I'm trying." But the reason why I bring that up is because I want your opinion on this. I have always been very outspoken. I have always been very much into what's right is right. What the truth is the truth. And so, where I have found myself in prior experiences is I get a huge target on my back, not necessarily because I'm stirring the pot or I'm creating situations, but simply because I'm telling the truth. And if you don't like the truth, in my opinion, and this is just me personally, everybody has their own way of looking at it. If I tell you the truth and you don't like it, that's on you, right? Like I'm not going to not tell you what is actually happening. Uh, and so this actually happened to me about 2, 3 weeks ago. I was talking to a good friend of mine, and he said, "Yeah, your name actually came up the other day." And usually, when people say that, I cringe and I go,
Mm-hmm.
"Okay, how did my name come up?" And he said, "Well, he said we were talking about officers and people that are motivated and things like that." And somebody said, "Well, yeah, Dave, we've run calls with him, and he does a really good job. And he's super motivated. He's passionate. And we've listened to his podcast." But God, that guy is constantly ruffling feathers. He's constantly upsetting people. And so my friend goes, "Well, but why?" And I said, "Well, because he always says stuff and then it happens." And he goes, "Well, what's wrong with that?" And they go, "Well, I mean, you're just not supposed to do that. Like, that's not how leaders should be. Like, they shouldn't be going out there telling people, hey, if you don't stop doing this, the fire department's going to end up getting in trouble because somebody's going to complain." I said, "Please tell me you told them that that's exactly what's supposed to happen." And he goes, "Yeah, I mean, this guy wasn't going to buy into it, so I just quit trying." But my question to you is, there are still people that look at Dave Mellon from 10 years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
they treat me today like it was 10 years ago. And I guess I just don't understand because I have worked with firefighters that I thought were absolutely horrible people, absolute slugs, wouldn't necessarily want to go into a fire, but if I was told to, I would. And then I moved away or got assigned to another area, whatever. Come full circle, maybe 2 or 3 years later, I see that person again, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give them another opportunity. And they ended up being a great person. They had a different
Mm-hmm.
personality, a different view on things, and we ended up building a relationship. So, how do you deal with that? I mean, what's the golden ticket on that?
So I think it goes back to just having grace. Uh, and one of the things we were talking about off camera was that like we carry high standards, and right or wrong, I'm going to start with myself first and foremost. Like I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I won't do or haven't done. Um, but then you start leading and you bump into people who have life circumstances or just something going on that they don't have the capacity, either mentally or physically or both, to be able to meet the standard of what you're trying to do, even if they wanted to. And like the perfect example is, have a firefighter come in that's going through a divorce and who's watching his family get ripped apart, and it's not his fault. Maybe it's not his wife's fault, or but the children are caught up in the middle of it. Now he's got to have a lawyer, and he's working 2 or 3 part-time jobs to pay for the lawyer, and that means he's working third shift before he comes in the firehouse. And like he's the guy that you can walk up to and be like, "Hey, when you're here, give me 100%." Like I know from reading about the brain and studying that for the last 6 years, I know he can't. I know he can't physically and mentally attend to that kind of stuff. So does that make your expectation any less important, or to the fact that you shouldn't expect 100% out of people? And I think maybe the compromise is that you ask for what they can give, and it's like kind of like church where you tithe. Like you can give 10%. That's the minimum that we're supposed to give, but you can also, give offerings and go above that.
Right.
And for those of us that can and will and have the capacity to do that, we will. But just because somebody puts $1 in an offering plate and that's 10% of their income, and somebody throws in 1,000 because that's 10% of theirs, doesn't mean that the 1,000 is drowning out the efforts and the contributions of the $1. So that's a piece of it. But I think really what has probably changed my world is I really try to look at the outcomes of stuff as with a default setting of whatever happened is 51% my doing. Now this stands counter to Jocko's extreme ownership. I didn't necessarily care for the first book. I think he clarified a lot of stuff, and his second one, The Dichotomy, I think that was a better book. But I'm not preaching you need to take 100% of the outcome as a leader, because I have worked with pieces of shit, not good people, not good firefighters professionally, not good people, not good values, bad actors, like genuinely bad people. But most of the time, probably like 99% of the time, it may be that, they're not meeting my standards as a firefighter, but they are like a fantastic father or mother, fantastic brother or sister, great community member. They may not want to throw ground ladders for 8 hours like I used to, but they can do an Excel spreadsheet that can help me balance the budget to buy the ladders to throw. And it's like, it's not your job to replicate yourself and everybody, which is one of the mistakes I think I made it early on as a leader. Like, I'm going to replicate my values and my expectations and my standard in you. And it's like, no, like, you're a certain level of clay with a certain ability to be molded, and you have certain characteristics that are inherent to you. And like, I'm going to bring that out. I'm going to massage that, and we're going to sculpt you to be the best, whatever you are. And that doesn't mean you have to love this job the way I love it. It doesn't mean you have to make the life choices or have the values or have the politics or have the religion that I have. And that's perfectly fine. And I can love you like, as a brother or sister like that. And that's awesome. And it doesn't mean I think less of you as a firefighter. I'm going to maximize your capabilities of whatever that is. And I'll just let that go. But when you get in a situation in which there's only one way, which is your way, then people quickly pick up on that, and they'll just say, all right, just freaking tell me what to do. And that's not what I want to do as a leader. Like, I do not want to have to tell them what to do every time. I want them to feel comfortable and competent so that they can orient their talents to solving our problems. And that's the loose reins thing. You have to have some loose, I think you have to have some loose reins with that. So when you get into like joking about, firefighter Martin being disappointed with Captain Martin, I think that's reflective of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And to go back to the trust thing, like, I believe in my children, my 10 and 8-year-old daughters, Ayla and Camille. I really hope that they take the values that my wife and I are modeling for them. And I hope these values help them to be successful in life, to be, our main ones are thoughtful, loving, kind. That if they can do their work and if they can treat others with that, then I hope that brings friends into their lives that add a lot of value. I hope that helps them find a partner in life that helps them to raise a family that then replicates those values, or whatever those have changed into to suit them for their lifestyle and the world as it is in 20, 30 years. But Ayla, who's 10, is not going to be able to have a successful marriage tomorrow.
Right.
But it doesn't mean I don't trust her. Like, she hasn't proven herself yet, but she doesn't have the capacity yet. Like, she's not at that point. So I have to love her through all of these mistakes and daddy, I don't understand. And like, I'm telling her what she should do and she doesn't do it. And then she's like, I'm sorry, daddy, I should have listened. And to think you didn't do that, Dave, and to think I didn't do that is like, that's the kind of stuff where I think we lose people. It's hypocritical to hold people to a standard and not provide them grace when at some point in one facet or another of your life that the same thing happened to you. To love her in a way that provides grace and growth, and that I can act as a mentor or a coach. And when I got a counselor, I'll counsel her, to act as a friend in certain moments, but never betray the role that I have as a parent, which is not to give her everything she wants, but to give her everything I can that she needs. And then watch her go out and make her own mistakes and not go, I told you 10 years ago that was going to happen. Support her through that mistake. And then I hope, like, when she watches this in 10 or 20 years, that we have a relationship in which she still talks to me. And because I would consider that a privilege too, because I do think there's a point where children can become more friends with their parents. But when you have a felt level of responsibility that you don't want to disappoint that person, you can find a deeper capacity for whatever it is that they're asking you to do. And I can remember needing to have a conversation with someone because they weren't meeting my expectations. And I knew they had the capacity to do it, but we didn't have the level of trust. We didn't have the benefit of the doubt for each other that when I gave this person the news that would hopefully change their performance for the better and let everyone else see how great this person was, because I just knew they were. I just knew they needed to feel supported and to feel safe. It took me 6 months to find the moment to have that conversation. Now, he never went below what was acceptable. So if that happens, then, we have to have the conversation sooner than later. But it was the frequency over time that got us to the moment that finally, and I don't even necessarily know if I told him the solution. I just finally asked the question in a way in which the light bulb went off. And if you ever experienced that, it's very powerful. Sometimes it's even to the point that you get goosebumps. And that, my friends, is called motivation. That's when you'll change your world. That's when you can dig in and do something you didn't want to do. That's when you can lose weight, stop smoking, fix your marriage, throw a ladder, whatever it is. So my questions and how you feel around me are what's influencing that. Not necessarily that I've given you an inspirational speech. Like you might have found inspiration in my absolutely abysmal failure, and that's okay. Like how we relate to each other is different. So just knowing that and being willing to spend a little bit more time working with people, especially when they're frustrating us, is like where grace starts. And so, you know, there's sympathy, empathy, and compassion. And empathy is the value I see a lot of times in fire department mission or value statements. So we'll get to that one second. But sympathy is someone dies, someone sends you a card. I'm sorry your loved one died. It's basically just identifying a feeling. I'm sorry and expressing it. It's nice. That's nicely thought of me, but that's fine. That's what it is. It's very, superficial. And I'm not saying get well cards and sympathy cards aren't necessary, but in the grand scheme of things, they're very superficial. There's not a lot of inspiration or motivation or support provided by those. So then you get into the perspective taking that comes with empathy. And it's like, oh, how would I feel if I was in the situation? Or, I may not have all the information that's gone into the fire chief's mind that made this decision that I so viscerally disagree with. So let's be humble here and know that you don't have all the answers and know that maybe you're wrong on this. And let's try what he wants to do and offer some feedback in a way that doesn't threaten his ego or threaten, his sense of dignity. And maybe it changes and maybe it doesn't. But I think that's where maybe the benefit of the doubt starts. You're willing to take perspectives that are not your own. And I think that's really, really important when you talk about trying to build diverse teams. And that has nothing to do with skin color or gender as much as it does have to do with gender and skin color. It's diversity of thought and backgrounds and beliefs. And it's just, we're wonderfully strong when we have those things. And empathy in itself is wonderful. So if we're willing to go just a little bit further on the other side of empathy to push through that, we get to what I like to think of as kind of giving people the benefit of that is this compassion. And that's what we probably would in the fire service call the brotherhood or the sisterhood, and you see it, family member gets sick, the department responds and helps that firefighter. The firefighter gets hurt, killed, they take care of the family. It's little things, cutting the yard, groceries, taking them to doctor's appointments, as much as it is fundraisers to pay off their mortgage. Or, you sometimes I see stuff where kids of fallen firefighters are loved and raised in the fire department for years, for decades after their father or mother dies in the line of duty. And like that's the stuff where if we're willing to invest a little bit of our time, rarely ever is it money, it's mostly time. If we're willing to inconvenience ourselves by giving up our time, people know that. They know time's precious and they know that that's valuable and they appreciate that. And I think one of the problems that we have with the fire service is our leadership has become very superficial or is very superficial. And I don't think it's intentional. I think it's a symptom of the pace that we have. There's just so much coming at us. We don't have time to sit on these things and talk with folks. And an example of that would be, somebody gets hurt and then you get a bolus of support and then they're still out 4 months later and nobody's calling them. Or they're getting letters to say, hey, you got to come back to work or we're going to fire you. And it's like, well, what about this brotherhood thing? And when that's violated, people pay attention. And when we don't at least offer empathy, people pay attention. And are always raising and lowering their efforts based on the potential rewards or risks or even punishments that they see, and a lack of support. Like, if you know your department's not going to cover you or cover your family, like, is that not sitting in the back of your mind when you're pushing into a fire, especially if there's an example where they actually screwed, a fellow brother or sister on the job? So it's there's so many parts to what your expectations are, and getting people to meet them, and how you express them, and whether your standards too high or not. And it's just to say, God, it's complicated. So just know that it's complicated, and be a little bit easier on yourself, and then be a little bit easier on them. And somewhere in there is that empathy and compassion that'll get you, that'll frame that relationship to the benefit of the doubt. And that's the stuff that really gets in front of you. That I think will land before you do. Like, they will know, your new crew will know whether you lead with empathy and humility, and they certainly will know if you don't. And that will threaten them, or that will excite them before you ever get there.
Oh
And you
yeah.
don't get a and then the other thing, Dave, to tie into, is you don't get a do-over. Like, you certainly don't get to undo your reputation. Um, and I wouldn't. Like, as much pain as it's caused me, as much conflict at home as I've taken stuff from home to, from work to home, I would not change any of that. It's like a tree as it grows. You have your center, and the growth happens around the center, and it's stronger as it gets thicker. But the center never comes out of the tree until it's dead. So I build off of my mistakes, and I build off of, like, the reputation that I had 8 years ago, where people would not trust me, that had never met me, or the people that knew me. It was just enough gossip to be like, well, maybe he's not who we think he is. um, that's part of me. But then that feeds back into what I talked about with, like, once you experience, like, where people won't talk to you, you have a genuine appreciation for when they will. So that's part of me. And I have found, especially as I move up in my organization, when people talk about what's going on in their lives, I'm not trying to solve their problem, but oftentimes I have a mistake that allows them to kind of anchor their problem to mine, and just at least lets them know that they're not alone. They're not novel. They haven't done anything that can't be recovered from. You don't have to recover it from the way I did, but it can be recovered from. And I think, like, I'll always talk about going up the mountain, and there's holes you fall into. So I've fallen in those holes. I left directions for how I got out. I even installed a ladder. They don't have to use that ladder when they come up the mountain and fall in the hole. They can find a different way. But I'm going to leave that there. But what I won't do is pick you up and skip you all over those holes, because I think there's valuable lessons that you can learn while you're spending some time in there, thinking about how you got in there and how you're going to get out. And that, I think, will help your competence as a leader.
Yeah. Well, and it's so refreshing to hear you say that, because for me personally, and again, everybody that's listening is going to have different experiences. And some people
Mm-hmm.
have had an easier time to get to where they are now than others. I've struggled. I have truly struggled. There have been times where I was like, God, why does this keep happening to me? Not just, gosh, why does this keep happening to me? But like, truly, like, God, why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
And so there, I did have to accept some ownership, and I did have to sit there and look at why those situations were happening. And what I figured out was it was me mostly, and some of it was other people's behavior or other people's views. But I had to make a decision: is this a path that I want to go down, or do I want to fundamentally change who I am to better suit the environment? And I struggled with that. And I actually talked to some of my good friends who are peers, and they said, "Dude, you got to be you." And the one truly honest, really truly and honestly, Mark Von Appen was the one that I
Mm-hmm.
sat down with, and Mark and I had many conversations. And I'm like, man, I'm struggling with this, because if I change who I am to better suit the environment, I'm going to get ahead faster if I play the game.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what good is that going to do me? And he said, Dave, at some point, someday, you're going to have somebody come up and ask you, what advice can you give me? And you're going to give them your story. And so it's happened a couple times. But my running joke is, hey kid, don't do what I did. Let me tell you, what I did. And then at the end of it, I say, listen, truly and honestly, I'm kind of messing with you. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things that you wish you could go and take back. But at the end of the day, I would rather be known as the firefighter who did hard work, who was ethical, who had good morals, and at the end of the day, kind of put that all together into what you and I would say, building that relationship, then the person who used the stepping stones to my advantage and snuck through processes and did all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's been hard, where I've fielded a lot of questions from others, and I know you've probably experienced the same thing. I've been called or told, and in fact, you know what? I was talking to you about this before. We said this. People look at you with your leadership style, and they realize that you have made mistakes, but they give you the benefit of the doubt. And so when you go teach classes, I've watched around the room as people are listening to you, and they're giving you the benefit of the doubt. Right? They don't know you from Adam.
Yeah.
But they're giving you the benefit of the doubt because it's relatable and it's understandable. And so, yeah, I think I try not to project my experiences onto others. And I try not to project my expectations of myself onto others, because that's not fair. But I do want to make sure that everybody understands my expectations. And I do want people to understand that, hey, whatever you hear about me, give me a few times to kind of get to know you and you get to know me.
Yeah.
And then base your decision on who I am.
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to what we are talking about with the trust, right? Like, let me show up for you,
Right.
and I will let you, show up to me about, and like, maybe we are who we think we are, and maybe we're not. And then working to reconcile those reputations. Like, that's a form of giving trust before you've earned it.
Yeah.
It's exactly what we've talked about. And the things that we're most passionate about, those are the things that we tend to interject our identities into. Like, I am Captain Martin. No, you're not. Like,
Right.
you're Benjamin.
You could not be
You're
Captain
Bob.
Martin tomorrow and you'd still be.
Yeah, yeah. And like, I'm preaching to the choir, because I know if people are watching this, then they're the A players. I get it, because they're trying to make themselves better, but they need to hear it. And everything I'm saying to the camera, I'm saying to myself in real time too, just to remind myself of, like, the fire department does not need you or care about you. The people in it do. But to think that if you retire tomorrow, that the doors won't go up and the wheels won't turn on the trucks is an exercise in your own vanity. And that doesn't mean to say that you don't matter. You matter a lot, especially if you're an A player. You also matter to your family and your friends. And so having a balance of that as well. If the fire department did shut its doors, if something happened to Dave or Benjamin, that would be poor leadership on our parts.
Right.
Like, that's not how it's designed to go. But I see so many guys and girls go 25 or 30 years and then they retire, and then they're like, well, now what? Like, I don't, like, I don't know what to do, or I'm distant between my wife or my husband. Like, we don't have a relationship. And so it's about keeping all of those things in perspective and balance. And um, I just try to focus on the moments, and the moments build to something better. Like, I really enjoy when people, let me put it this way. Like, if leadership, like, what drove me was like a software on your iPhone, then leadership 1.0, that operating software, was that when I got promoted, I wanted everybody to like me. And I actually thought, I was foolish enough to think that that was doable. It didn't mean I
We
wasn't going to be
all did,
challenged.
man. We were all there.
It didn't mean that I wasn't going to get things wrong, that I wasn't going to be challenged. I just felt like that, with my personality, we could get along at the end of the day, and we could respect our differences. And that lasted all of like a month, if that. I'm probably being generous. Okay. So then I think I defaulted to leadership 2.0, which I feel like most people probably operate in or live in, especially if you've been doing this a while, which is, if I can't be liked by everybody, then I want to be respected by everybody. And that lasted a month, not even. All right. Because I went through difficult situations and I held people accountable, and they did not appreciate it. They did not like it. They did not respect me. Like, 10 years later, we still don't talk. They wouldn't piss on me if I was on fire. And that doesn't mean I feel the same way about them, but like, I'm not respected by everybody. And it's like, well, now what? And like, so I think a lot of times the answer to that is we go, well, I am who I am. Like, it is what it is. And that's a fixed mindset. It's like, are you? Just because you're 6'3" and you can stand up as 6'3" doesn't mean the situation doesn't warrant you lowering your profile, like in a fire, and crawling. Not like elephants holding each other's tails, but the good kind of crawl,
Right.
like quick, right? And then when you're done, you stand back up. Like, just because you could or can doesn't mean you do. And so it's not about surrendering your integrity to adapt to the moment. It's, Kurt Isaacson says conditions drive tactics, so I always like to talk about feelings and moods drive behavior. Like, you adapt your strength and your talents to it. And there's a lot of situations, I think, especially when we're passionate, where we feel like we're being boxed in and they're challenging our integrity. And it really isn't about that. It's not. It's just a strategy decision. It's not about your core ethics, your values. And if you look back, Dave, and anybody that's listening, think about the time where you just had a drop dead argument or conflict over something. And does it matter today? Like, does it matter in the same intensity that it did before? Like, did it really change anything? And like, I figured this out a long time ago. I've worked on projects that I felt very strongly about, and like, a fatal error was I was shit talking the current state of affairs on this committee that I was leading for a project, not knowing that the guy who did the last version was in the room. I just didn't know, like, lack of context, right? So
Yeah.
imagine how I made him feel. And so it takes us 2 years to do this project, and I'm like, yeah, they'll remember us for this. And 10 years later, I don't even recognize the project. Like,
Right.
nobody even knows I was involved in it. And it was like, man, I lost sleep. I lost time with my kids for this. It's like, no, that's you wanting to satisfy the ego. But it doesn't mean it didn't matter at the time. It didn't mean I didn't grow from it too. And so, having tools in the toolbox is as much applicable to the fireground on your decision making as it is in leadership with people. It doesn't mean you have to say anything you could and would say. It doesn't mean if you don't that you've surrendered your integrity and what people expect from you. Like, grow through that. When people are hungry to hear the truth from you, Dave, you're winning. But if they're threatened by it, then you have some room to grow there. And I'm saying this to me as I'm saying it out loud, thinking about your situation. And if you can do that, then I think you get to leadership 3.0. And I think what I have realized and what I'm operating off of, and doesn't mean I'll end this way, but for right now, this drives everything every day, is it does not matter if people like you. It does not matter if people respect you. What matters most in leadership is that people like and respect themselves more as a result of your time together. And maybe that's learning to throw a ladder as much as it is saving their marriage. And if you can do that, which looks different for everybody, then I don't think there's anything you can't do in your organization or in your personal life. If people feel good about themselves, and it doesn't mean you're serving ice cream, it means you are helping them realize a better version of whatever it is in the moment that's motivating them.
Right.
And maybe that's just like shining a light down at the base of the ladder and go, hey, it's there, just reminding you. Then that's it. And I think that's a game changer. And I think that operates consistent with my desire to see a compassionate fire service, remind us that that's who we were at our core. And I feel like that's how I would want others to describe me, that they can come to me for truth, and I will give them truth, but I will be thoughtful in my truth, and I will do it in a way that preserves their dignity. And they may not like it, but I will support them in whatever I'm saying, which means I don't say it and I walk away from them. I don't say it and turn my back when they get mad at me. Like, I'm here. And I experienced this in my marriage. We have, like, my wife and I, we really are best friends. And like, we've gone to the brink of divorce twice, and like, we're stronger than we've ever been. But it doesn't mean we haven't been broken. And there's almost like I think our strength comes from walking up to the line and knowing that we could have chosen to walk away from each other and we didn't. And we prioritized our children and our family over our own interest, especially me, like my selfish own interest, because I was the bull-headed moron in majority of our fights. Like, she fought for things that mattered, which was the family, and I fought her over stupid stuff like which information was right, or things that didn't matter.
Right.
And a young, Ben Martin didn't know that. And so, yeah, a growth mindset's a great thing. And that doesn't mean that you didn't do the best you did at the time. It just means that you're always hungry to do better. And that's when people see you willing to do that, then it reminds them that it can be done. And I think a lot of times you see teams turn around when a leader that goes in there with a little bit of appetite little bit of humility, I think you can see good things come out of that.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so anyway, that's the
No,
soapbox for that.
no, dude, I love your soapboxes. Like this is probably the least amount that I've talked in a bunch of podcasts. Like this
Well,
is,
that's not a good thing then. I'm
no,
talking
it
too much. I'm
is. It
sorry.
is. No, and it's funny because when you brought this up earlier, it made me think, and it's introspective, right? Like I'm sitting here and I'm looking at me and how I do things, and I'm trying to relate it back to what you're saying. But I used to be that bull in a china shop. I didn't care if I was sitting in a room full of fire chiefs or a room full of drivers or a room full of probies. What came out of my mouth was whatever I was thinking. I didn't have any couth. I mean, it was if something was stupid, I'd be like, ah, that sounds pretty stupid to me. That's not okay. And I know
Yeah.
that now, right? But I had to learn how to read the room. And so a lot of the humility of, if I go to a mutual aid meeting or if I go to a chief officer's in service training or whatever it is, my delivery of said topic as a company officer is going to be vastly different than my delivery to the crew sitting around the kitchen table.
Oh, 100%.
And so that was the one thing that was really, really hard for me to learn is that, there's the old adage that, you get more with honey than you do with vinegar. I was exuding vinegar from every orifice in my body for
Yeah.
several years. And then I realized, like, well, sometimes I can mix the vinegar with honey, and sometimes I can just use honey, but sometimes I have to use vinegar. And so then I learned where to kind of plug those things in. And it really, truly has changed my career for the better.
Oh, 100%. Mary Poppins taught you that, right? Spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Yep.
Yeah. And, going back to like, because sometimes people really have a hard time and they're going, no, I don't agree with you. If I don't say it how I feel it and what I'm thinking, then I'm betraying myself. And it's like, well, all right, you don't talk to your children the same way when they're 2 that you do when they're 10. Are you betraying who you are as a parent? Are you adapting to your audience? And there's a point for that. And I think people learn also as they grow with that growth mindset and that maturity that they figure out really what matters. And so they can, if the fire chief comes to you and says, like, break this down and show me where the problems are, you can list all the different ways because once you know what you've weighed it and what matters, you know what gets its attention and what really does matter, and you know where to yield and where not to yield. And there's some give and take because if you're winning all the time, if you're always right, then you're not leading. Like there's if that's why that 51% is the default. You have to leave the 49% for them. Like there has to be some accountability for them to feel like, and that there has to be some ownership for them to feel. They have to feel that their efforts are contributing to the outcome of it,
Sure.
good or bad, right? Because if it's bad, then it might motivate them to change. If it's good, then it feels good. It might motivate them to do it more. But if you're assuming 100% of everything, then there's no room for anybody but you and the need to satisfy your ego or, fall on the sword to the hilt, which unfortunately, like a lot of people do that, but it's inauthentic. It's like, oh, it's all my fault. And it's like, shut up. Like, we know
Yeah.
it's not
Oh,
all your fault.
100%.
Like
100%.
nobody enjoys that person doing that, that public display of like ownership when you clearly don't like that's not you at the fire table. And we know that's not you. So stop doing that. Um, and you start at 51%, but then you explore the context and you really try to learn from it. And maybe it's only 1%. I don't think it's ever 0% because again, I don't want to ever state out loud that I didn't have an opportunity to influence the outcome. So like 1% is my minimum, but maybe it is 99% my fault.
Yeah.
you know, but if it involves others, then it can never be 100% because they've got to have at least 1%, and it can never be 0% because I got to have 1%. And everywhere in there is the opportunity to learn and grow and motivate each other because everything's reciprocal. Like I have a good day, it's infectious. I have a bad day, it's infectious. We win, we win. I lose, did we lose? Like how's that work? Well, it depends on
Right.
how you lead and how you model that. And so since everything like the strength of the fire service for me has always been the company, the many. We can do incredible things in emergency situations against all odds because we allow ourselves in that moment to come together, the collective coming together and leveraging that strength. And then you get into a leadership role and you're like, I got to fix this. I got to do this. And you're like, when did it stop being about the collective?
Right.
When,
Right. Why can't it be everybody trying to fix it?
yeah, why is it not? And so and that's where I think the breakdown comes from. Some people fear not having answers and being wrong because in their culture, those leaders get eaten alive. And at some point, you just get comfortable with being who you are, and people know you for it, and they'll know which problems to bring you and which ones not, and they'll know which ones might get you upset and which ones won't, and where they'll get more bang for their buck. And like I, it bothers me initially when people will walk up and say, man, you're not really who I thought you were. I'm like, well, why did you think I was that way? Well, I heard something about you. I hate that. I
Yeah.
hate that. But at the same time, like, that's awesome, right? Because it means that I have proven that I'm not whatever it was. So I hate that it existed. That's
Sure.
the center of the tree. And like them telling me that I'm not that is a new layer on the outside. And it's like I'm interested in growing those layers as much as I can. And that person's got to think that person's got to feel that it's safe to tell me that, especially given the center of my tree that like is a fist. Like for them to come up and say something like that, I can't go, no, I was never those things. Back to 1%. Maybe I was. Maybe I was 99% of those things, but maybe I was only 1%. But I was something to someone like that because they spoke it, right,
Yeah.
wrong, or indifferent. So I'll own it and we'll grow from it. And then I feel like that gives me the ability to go to somebody and say the same thing, which hopefully can start to get the relationship to build. Because I think that's how we leverage everything. The stronger the relationship, and that can be professional, it can be personal, it can be both, and both are great. I think they're rare, like truly rare, like best friends at work and best friends off duty, rare, but it absolutely can exist. And you can have that with people that you work for and people that work for you. It adds a layer of complexity when you introduce the roles in there, but it can absolutely be done. And you'll find out very quickly that who and you can and can't do it with. And then that usually reveals people's character, yours and theirs, unfortunately. And sometimes it breaks up, but sometimes it's really reinforced. And luckily, I'm really close with some folks that used to work for me, and now I work for them, and that's pretty cool. Like
Yeah.
my ego's not wrapped up in enough to know that I like now the child has become the parent. Okay, like take care
Right.
of me because that's going to happen anyway, right? Like I'm going to go to nursing home one day, and Ayla and Camille are going to have to come, make sure the bill gets paid and take care of me. So yeah, the child does become the parent at some point, I think.
Sure.
So what's true for the firehouse is true for the fireground is true at home, I think, as well. I think it's all the same. It's all the human condition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. And well, I mean, we've already talked about enough stuff. I don't, it doesn't hurt me to say this, but I had a firefighter get assigned to me, and it was probably like a month after she got assigned to me. Once we kind of broken through those barriers, right? I had gotten to know her, she had gotten to know me, but we were sitting at the kitchen table drinking some coffee, and she goes, I heard a lot of things about you before I met you, and I got to be honest. I don't know where these people got this from because I heard that you did this, and I heard in 2007 you did that, and I heard that you got written up for this, and I heard that you threw the write up at the chief, and I'm like, yeah, no, I did all those things. And she's like, are you kidding me? You seriously did all that? I'm like, yeah, that's like 100% accurate.
Yeah.
However, that was like 10 or 12 years ago. Like that was the different me. And
Yeah.
so this has been my growth, and this is where I've come to now. And she told me, months later, she was like, I just couldn't believe that you honestly told me that all those things that I heard were true. She's like, you could have totally gotten away from it and been like, I don't know where they got that from because that's not me. That's not who I am. And I said, yeah, but that wouldn't be being true to myself, and it wouldn't be fair to you, because that's an opportunity for you to learn. I want people to see that the guy that I was, or the person that I was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, is not the same person. And to your point, it's the same message that I instill with my two boys. You can have problems. You can be a horrible student in middle school and then go on to be a valedictorian. You can be a valedictorian and drop the ball and end up flunking out of school. And so it goes both ways, but everybody can change, and everybody has that opportunity to make it what they want it to be. But I don't ever try to shy away from that because I want my children to understand that that's just their story, and that's just part of their life. And so they need to embrace it, embracing the resistance.
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Yeah. Nice plug.com.
Right. Yeah. And so, I want them to embrace that. But I didn't do that alone. Right. I had people that instilled that in me. My wife and I had talked about it before we had children. How do we want to raise our children? And we were 100% on the same page, except for maybe like one or two things. And they're inconsequential. It's not things that I'm like, oh man, that's going to completely ruin my kids' lives. but 99% of it was we want our kids to be kind, we want them to be caring, and we want them to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, 100%, man. I love it.
So we're right at the hour and 12-minute mark. So we want to keep it right around an hour so that people can listen to it while they're working out or driving to work. We found that right about the hour mark. As I've told everybody else, eventually people are either going to want to stop talking to me or I'm going to run out of people to talk to. And so we'll have a 2.0, right? We'll have a Ben Martin 2.0 series. And I'd always love to have you come back as a co-host.
Oh
If there's
yeah.
where I can't do the show, have you come in and do it. But how can people get a hold of you?
So the easiest way, if you've got some time and you're curious about anything we've talked about, is to go to the website, which is embracetheresistance.com. And that's where you can find the longer reads on the blog, articles, the articles that have been published in Fire Engineering and Firehouse, and then certainly stuff like this, where if you've got some more time, like I'd love for you to go there and then email me and let me know what relates, what you like and what you don't, and what you're curious about, what you're not. We also have the page on Facebook, the Embrace Resistance, and that's probably more like the short motivational stuff, or if I'm feeling something for the moment, I'll push it out there, and that's a fun place to pop in as well. And then most of the major conferences, there'll be some part or chance to see one of the programs, whether it's the culture and climate or whether it's the intoxicated leadership one, which I enjoy doing both. Those are usually like the 90-minute formats, and that's fun, but that's just a teaser. Like, if you can go to the website, if you're interested in any of this or hosting this at your place, I really like talking this for a full day, which is something I never thought I would do. But it's fun enough to explore stuff that's going on in your department that at least 8 hours is a good, and it's probably not a class like you've ever experienced. Like, we throw pieces of paper, we have air guitar battles, like we explore this in a fun, curious way. Because, like I said at the beginning, I'm a terrible student, so I try to make this class for terrible students. But on the website, you'll find my email address and you'll find my contact information. So if there's anything I can do for you, don't hesitate to reach out.
That's awesome, man. Well, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I know we'll see each other coming up here in a couple months.
Yeah, and the Ozarks, right?
Yep, Lake of the Ozarks, the Revolutionary Fire Tactics at the Lake. It's the one thing I will say is that as you get into the circuit, right? Like as I started teaching and starting going to conferences, it has become these family reunions. It's become these things where, I go to the lake, I know I'm going to see you. I know I'm going to see the Woodwards. I know I'm going to see the guys from Oklahoma. And then that feeds into, now I'm going to other conferences where I get to meet new people and see them every year. And so it's just truly, truly honest. And for those of you that are watching and listening, if you haven't seen Embrace the Resistance, you have to check it out. It is absolutely one of the coolest programs because it is so fun and it is so relatable. And it's not your death by PowerPoint, but it's also not just a class discussion. There's very structured messages, and it's stuff that you can turn around and use immediately. It's not stuff that you have to go back and pretend like you have to, I'm going to let this marinate for a couple months. You can walk out of the class. And again, I've gotten bits and pieces of your class several times so I can piece it together. There's stuff that I walked out and I'm like, man. And when I got home, guys were like, what happened to you? I'm like, I went and took this class and it was so no, it is awesome. I hope people come and find you. And again, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure, Dave. Thanks so much for the opportunity.